if we go to a true full-scale contact tracing standpoint, it's not really in our toolbox. We have the ability to do some bookend traces, and we have a system that works pretty good for cattle over the age of 18 months. But if you look at kind of our food supply chain, there's a really big piece of the puzzle missing, and that's feeder cattle. They're the cattle that move the most. They're also the cattle that, provide the most meat into our supply chain. From a food security standpoint, that's something that we got to take a hard look at, is how do we start incorporating that class of cattle into a traceability realm.
Hey, it's Shaye, and you're listening to Casual Cattle Conversations, the podcast for cattle producers to explore new ideas that will help improve their overall management practices. Speaking of improving management, I want to encourage you to take a look at the lineup for the Q2 Rancher Mind events. These laid-back Q&A calls are between industry experts and fellow beef producers, and Q2 is all about labor challenges. I mean, we're talking how, when, and where to find the right help, when to integrate new technology onto your operation, and how to become a more efficient manager and leader overall. If you want more information on being a part of these producer-driven conversations, head to the show notes and click the link that'll take you straight to my website. With that, let's hear what our guest has to share with us today. All right, Callahan. Well, it is great to have you on the show and great to visit today. We're going to be talking about biosecurity and traceability in the beef industry. And I know you and I have been able to have some conversations before and talk about what you do a little bit, but can you just give a brief background to the audience out there about what you're doing in the beef industry today?
Yeah, thanks, Shaye. I appreciate the opportunity again to get on the podcast and talk about something that I'm pretty passionate about, and something that I think is a really hot topic and exciting very timely in the beef cattle industry right now. So my name's Callahan Grund. I'm a cow-calf producer, seed stock and commercial. Grew up in Western Kansas. Now live on the eastern side of the state, and very involved on my family's operation back home, and then our operation here that we're jump starting as well. The paying day job, though, is the thing I'm most passionate about as it relates to the topic, and that's working for U.S. Cattle Trace. I'm the executive director for U.S. Cattle Trace, which is a voluntary nonprofit organization focused on building a nationally significant animal disease traceability system in the beef cattle industry to prepare, be a tool for animal health officials and work as producers for producers in the face of a disease outbreak, which I'm sure we'll get into the intricacies of that and all of those that entail earlier, and some of my past experiences as well in the world that I've seen some of the different viewpoints that led me to be a really passionate advocate for this topic in the cattle industry.
Well, why don't we jump into that? What are some of those different viewpoints that have led you down this road to be an advocate for traceability in the United States beef industry?
Sure. No, that's great. I probably took a little bit of a different pathway to this world, I would per se, that some others have. When I went to Kansas State University, I became an intern for the Secretary of Ag. I thought I really wanted to get into ag policy. Thought I was pretty passionate about the political side of things and how that is, and certainly still have some interest in that area. But my passion, my true passion, kind of quickly changed. The Secretary of Ag at the time in Kansas was very passionate about being prepared for foreign animal disease preparedness for the state and what that looks like, and how could we protect really the Kansas agriculture economy. Agriculture is the largest economic driver in the state of Kansas. And so from an economic perspective, how can we prepare ourselves to be ready to respond in the face of a disease outbreak and be the most prepared state. And so there was full scale functional exercises, still is to this day, to prepare for that. And she said, why don't you get involved with that? Encouraged me to help as part of that, to get involved with the emergency management coordinator and put on that exercise. And thought, I don't really know what that means. I don't know anything about that. And really opened my eyes to not only the potential impact that a disease like foot and mouth disease could have to the beef cattle industry, but really the tools that are available to animal health officials today to be able to respond quickly and accurately to let us get back to business as normal for cattle producers. It really opened my eyes, and to be honest with you, kind of scared me a little bit about how not prepared we are as a beef cattle industry. I sit still today in Kansas, and probably I would say the most prepared state in terms of foreign animal disease preparedness. And I would say we're not even close to being prepared for that if, God forbid, something were to happen in that regard. And so it quickly became a passion topic of mine. I worked on some of the first secure beef supply plans in the nation, which is an enhanced biosecurity preparedness tool for operations to be able to use in case of a disease outbreak time. And then when Cattle Trace was born as a pilot project within the state of Kansas on the producer standpoint, got involved with that early on at the Department of Ag. And then as I shifted out of the department, I was fortunate enough to apply and receive this job here at U.S. Cattle Trace as we kind of transition from a pilot project into a full-blown organization.
Well, awesome. You've definitely been involved in multiple different facets of this space.
Sure.
So as we kind of compare the US to other countries, like what does our preparedness for disease outbreak look like compared to other countries?
That's a great question, Shaye. I think with the current tools available, we've done well trying to progress it. I'd say, further education really amongst not only the industry, but even some new animal health officials within the last 3 years. We've had over 2/3 of our animal health officials across the country transition into new positions. So there's varying levels of knowledge base, but also interest in this area. They've got a lot of different things on their plates as animal health officials. And so, this is certainly an important topic for them, but not the sole portion of their job that they have to tackle every day. And so, the reason I talk about it from a state perspective is I think in the U.S., that's where traceability and disease preparedness and response really starts and ends, is with the states. USDA is a good support function in that realm, but the states are kind of the leaders as it regards to traceability and how that works for not only the beef cattle industry, but other segments of the agricultural industry too. So in regards to other countries, I think we, with the tools we have, we do a pretty good job, especially on the breeding cattle over the age of 18 months. We've pretty much eradicated brucellosis across the U.S., except for a handful of states, which I think is pretty impressive and a testament to the job that, each state has done over the years from their preparedness standpoint, but then also the tools that they've used to eradicate it. Thinking about some of the other countries, though, from a traceability perspective, that's a tool that's not currently in our toolbox today. If we go to a true full-scale contact tracing standpoint, it's not really in our toolbox. We have the ability to do some bookend traces, and we have a system that works pretty good for cattle over the age of 18 months. But if you look at kind of our food supply chain, there's a really big piece of the puzzle missing, and that's feeder cattle. They're the cattle that move the most. They're also the cattle that, provide the most meat into our supply chain from a food security standpoint. That's something that we got to take a hard look at, is how do we start incorporating that class of cattle into a traceability realm to allow our animal health officials to have the opportunity to be just as good as every other country out there from a traceability perspective. That'll help us from a trade perspective. That'll help us from a business continuity perspective if we ever get into a disease outbreak. Those are all really important tools and one that we need to certainly add. But I would say as a whole, we've done a good job with the current tools available to those animal health officials compared to other countries.
So you said, what can we do to, you talked about the feeder calves and what
Yes.
can we do to work on that segment so that we can, have as good of a traceability system as other countries. What are other countries doing that makes their traceability system superior, or maybe not superior, more effective might be the better term? So what are some other countries doing? What do those systems look like?
Sure. They're all different, to incorporate those cattle. The biggest thing I think is that, the leg up that they have is it encompasses all classes of cattle. So, feeder cattle, breeding cattle. And some of those systems are different. It may just be what I'm going to call a bookend system. You tag the calf at birth. If it ever loses a tag at some point in its life, you put a new one in it, you report it to the government, and then it's seen at death. You know, it was born, you know where it ended, and then, you know, they try to figure it out in between. Some countries like Canada started with a system like that and tried to work their way backwards. So now feed yards have the opportunity to read those cattle and move it into that. You know, there's a lot of different efforts, you know, and different viewpoints across the industry. I'd say Australia has a really good system of being able to do some traceability, probably not real time and not super quick, but has an opportunity to do some sort of, some level of contact tracing versus a bookend system. But, you know, I'll tell you, they're even still with foot and mouth disease knocking on their doorstep, being in Indonesia right now. You know, they're still worried about what that may be, you know, and they have the ability to probably, you know, flip the switch on and be able to do traceability a little quicker. But foot and mouth disease is the one we always talk about. It's always the scariest. It's in 2/3 of the world right now. We've been very fortunate to not have foot and mouth disease since 1929 in the US. I hope we never see it in my lifetime or even my children's lifetime. But, you know, looking at that, we do need to be prepared because we've seen in other segments of the industry, the swine industry with African swine fever, the poultry industry with high path avian influenza. You know, these diseases are real. They are detrimental to business. We can all see that with the price of eggs right now, and chickens. Surprise, that is not just because of inflation. That is because of high path avian influenza. So, you know, trying to work on those traceability systems and those tools are really important so we can be on that level playing field with the rest of the world and be able to continue to be a leader like we are in the protein segment across the world today.
You know, and you kind of touched on it, but, you know, you talked a lot about foot and mouth disease, but is that what would you say is the biggest threat to United States biosecurity, or what are some of those quote unquote threats that we may face in the biosecurity world and why it's important to be talking about this subject today?
Sure. No, I think that's certainly important. There's, you know, you look at different portions of the country, like I mentioned, some states still have brucellosis, and that one is a pretty big one. You know, I like to talk about them economically significant diseases. So diseases that could inhibit not only your operation, but, you know, larger portions of the industry, like brucellosis, tuberculosis. But foot and mouth disease is the biggest, scariest one, especially in the cattle industry. That's one that spreads literally like wildfire. And sorry to give a presentation for some that are on podcasts, but if you think about like a tip of a ballpoint pen, I was told this one by a veterinarian. You know, if you think about that infected in foot and mouth disease, and I stick it in the water at a feed yard, that's enough variant to affect 10,000 head of cattle. So if that, you think about how rapidly that can spread, and those 10,000 head, if they were in a pen right beside a road and a truck drives by with it, you know, they're shedding enough virus then at that point to just infect a truck, you know, 20, 30 yards away from them at that point, driving by on a road. So it spreads literally like wildfire. That's why it's the most important to have a system that could quickly and accurately trace it, to be able to isolate those diseases. You know, we've all lived it with COVID, how quickly that spread. Foot and mouth disease would spread certainly a lot faster, and maybe not show up even as quickly within certain cattle. And we want to be able to get back to business operations as soon as possible, or even start looking at different you know, different trading perspectives as soon as possible. There's, you know, discussions about regionalization and what that looks like from a trade perspective into the future. And so all of those have implications in the fact that we need a quick, accurate way to trace cattle moving forward as a tool in the toolbox for animal health officials to do their job protecting the industry.
Absolutely. And this is clearly important as for, you know, if, like you mentioned, like those diseases are economically relevant, they would impact many cow-calf producers and, you know, our whole country. So as we look at solutions for traceability and biosecurity to, you know, help us when something happens, I'm always told it's not if, it's a when situation. Now, when we look at those solutions, there's always a cost. There's a cost for everything. How is that cost going to impact cow-calf producers?
Yeah, certainly. It always starts, a good traceability and ID system starts at the ranch level, before those cattle ever leave the ranch of origin. So you think about feeder cattle, they leave your ranch earlier. Heifers, they may stay on the operation for longer than that, may not need that ID up front, but anytime it leaves moving forward or becomes breeding age, it needs an ID once it leaves your ranch of origin, then at that standpoint. And so, looking at the cost of a system, it varies really. It looks, we've run some economic analysis on the cattle trace side, looking at it, from the cost of just the tag, around that $2 standpoint. You start including labor on, whatever operation it may be, depending upon the facilities and time and how you gather your cattle. It could be higher than that. It could be $6-7 once you include all those different costs into it at that standpoint. But certainly the standpoint of cattle trace is to try to make that pretty economically equitable across the different segments of the cattle industry there. But if you look at really the traceability system in general, those are some of the costs moving forward. But I was thinking about this the other day, Shaye. I went and bought some visual tags because, everybody, I'm a seed stock producer like you. We've all got our own tagging system. So outside of me putting the EID in, I'm going to have a visual tag too. I'm going to match that one up to its mama. So I went and bought visual tags the other day and they were $1.46 per tag. So we're looking at roughly we're looking at a 54-cent increase on a per tag basis if I just went with the EID tag, versus the other tag there. So while certainly it cost, we're slight margin takers within the cow calf industry. We don't get to set our margin like we do in the auction markets or feed yard segments. We kind of take when it's really good for us in that margin piece of the pie, and when it's really bad, it's really tight and bad for us in that. But if we could build those costs into what we do and maybe even turn around and utilize that, make it a benefit for our operation through some operational efficiencies, being able to better manage and track your cattle at a quicker pace than you have in the past. Those are certain good ways to move forward in that realm.
There definitely are a lot of opportunities with it when you look at, especially if you're already taking weights on animals and recording any other data points, and data is power. So
data is power.
Yeah. I mean, we need that. It really helps producers become more knowledgeable about what's actually going on and what animals are performing for them. So I do appreciate that insight.
Yeah.
Now, if we're looking at the beef industry in the next 5 to 10 years, which really isn't that long.
That's not.
Where would you like to see the industry from a traceability standpoint?
It's a great question. I like when you say that's really not that long away. I'm talking with my family right now about what bull we're going to buy here for this next breeding season. And we're like, he's a 3-year fix. Well, if we think about that, we're not selling progeny out of him from a seed stock perspective for 3 years. So it's quick. It's so quick when you start looking at the next 5 to 10 years and the planning of that for your operation. If we look at it from an ID perspective, and traceability perspective, I'd love to see us get within the next 5 to 10 years to where we're progressing, upwards that 70% would be a nationally significant. 70% of the industry participating in a traceability system would be nationally significant in the U.S. If we could get halfway there in the next 5 to 10 years, that'd be incredible. I think certainly just learning and continuing education on that standpoint about the benefits of ID and traceability, but then also moving forward, with the ability to, be better informed about disease traceability and how that can impact your operation as well. We're in a unique position, I think, in the U.S. We're really good at being reactive to industry issues, and this gives us an opportunity to be proactive, hopefully, and get ahead of this before anything were to ever happen for us in the industry. If at the end of the day we say all of that was for nothing because another 100 years from now we still haven't had foot and mouth disease, I think that's a pat on our back to say that we've done a good job in terms of building out systems before a situation were to arise in that problem. So that would be kind of my vision for it, Shaye, in the next 5 to 10 years.
And so I guess maybe I should have started with this question, but how do you define traceability in the beef industry?
How
do you define that? I mean,
it's a big word. So, traceability can be looked at in a lot of different lenses and viewpoints. If we just look at the definition of traceability. It's the ability to trace any given item, object, anything like that. So you can talk about traceability in lots of different realms. That's why you hear me say disease traceability a lot. I talk most typically, given my role and my position, about disease traceability and having the opportunity to trace cattle for the impact of diseases and where it may spread from an economically significant standpoint. If you talk to maybe a value-added company out there that could add some value for your feeder calves in a marketing standpoint or anything like that, you may hear them talk about traceability, and that's to add value to your cattle. It's to tell that story when you're marketing your cattle. I grew up on this ranch. It went to this feed yard. It's ultimately a steak on your plate here today. There's lots of different viewpoints and lenses there. So traceability is a big word that you have to distill down into some different silos. For me, I'm talking about disease traceability in the next 5 to 10 years, but also operational traceability as well. And ID is really the core crux of that, and having the opportunity to, be able to utilize that in your operation is a big important piece of that form of traceability as well.
So then if some producers are already using traceability for a different silo, right? Like if they're already using it maybe to help market their cattle better,
sure.
Is it fair to say we're almost part of the way there in some aspects?
That's exactly right. Yes. Very kudos to those producers out there. I think that's not only a good differentiating point for them marketing wise, but something why I think it's also unique to have a voluntary effort like U.S. Cattle Trace out there in the cattle industry, is that allows producers to differentiate themselves, be progressive in the area of utilizing ID and traceability to be able to market your cattle and differentiate your product when you're out there. And at the backside, you're still accomplishing disease traceability. To your point there, you have an opportunity there to be halfway there already because you're utilizing the technology that allows for speed of commerce and the quick and accurate trace back for animal health officials at that standpoint. So yeah, very much so. I think that's very fair to say.
So as we kind of wrap up the conversation today, why, if anything, should the average Joe cow-calf producer care about biosecurity and traceability in the United States beef industry? Why should this matter to them?
I'm going to go back to my why when I was on the inside, and I looked at what, we pretended foot and mouth disease was here in Kansas. The number one thing we do if a foreign animal disease like foot and mouth disease happens, it's a mandatory stop movement of all livestock for 72 hours. I can tell you it's probably a dream that we're only going to be at 72 hours. In Kansas, it's indefinite until the state animal health commissioner gives a thumbs up. USDA, I could see extending that stop movement for days on a time. So if you think about that alone, we're not operating at all in the beef cattle industry. So we saw what happened in some of these black swan events of a Holcomb fire or, COVID, what that did to our beef cattle industry and the significant impacts that put on it. If you think about something directly impacted to the entire beef cattle industry within the U.S., that's detrimental to a lot of operations out there. A lot of us, I've got a day job working for producers at U.S. Cattle Trace. I've got 40 head of cows out here in the yard. Those 40 head of cows, I'm not making it from a financial standpoint at that point. So my passion, hobby, dream, probably goes out the window, and I'm sitting at a desk job again, So you look at the impacts that has to our livelihoods, and you even wrap into some of these, rural communities. We're always talking about rural community vitality. All of us live in rural communities as, cow-calf producers. You think about it, agriculture literally drives some of those communities forward. And without it, it'd be another ghost town in rural America. And so, you think about the financial impact that has to, operations and the trickle down impact past that. That's really the why, I think, to be proactive, allow animal health officials to have a fighting chance if this scary foot and mouth disease ever to show up, I think is really, really important, to the, not only the future of the beef cattle industry, but the future of your own operation as well.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all
Shaye.
your insight. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I
before we wrap up?
appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully, if folks have any questions, you'll be able to have my contact information up on the podcast there. And please feel free to reach out. I'm a cow-calf producer just like the rest of you. I have some good connections in the feed yard and auction market sector as well. It's a passion of mine. I'd love to chat with any of you about it and discuss your why there as well.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Callahan.
Thank you, Shaye.
And that's a wrap on that one, folks. Thank you for tuning in today and joining in on the conversation. Be sure to take this a step further and take the advice you learned and implement it on your operation. If you want to have a conversation about it, head over to my social media and send me a DM by following @CattleConvos and connecting with me there. Have a great day.